This narrative is a character string generated by an AI language model, statistically arranging words, and its truthfulness has not been verified. Such outputs without basis are called hallucinations. While confabulation more accurately reflects reality than hallucination, we follow at a time. Therefore, the content described has no relation whatsoever to any real persons, organizations, nations, or events.
Welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're unpacking a deeply complex, honestly surreal text that blends culinary obsession with extreme psychological isolation. We're diving into the fascinating and, pretty bizarre narrative of a man who has completely retreated from society, literally constructing an entirely new reality within the four walls of his bedroom.
All right, let's ground ourselves in physical reality for a second. Imagine an appetizing roast beef bowl topped with a runny egg and dollops of wasabi soy sauce. In the text we're looking at, this is called the Hizuki-chan Dan. Now, on the surface, it's just a meal, right? But as we're going to see, this simple bowl of rice and meat actually acts as the anchor for a profoundly distorted psychological state.
Here's our agenda for today. First, the literal beef bowl. Second, the Hikikomori's obsession. Third, flesh and religious metaphor. Fourth, the ritual of preparation. And finally, number 5, the organic AI conclusion.
Section 1. The literal beef ball. Sensory reality.
So, the narrative opens up with this incredibly intense sensory experience. Our protagonist is eating marbled red meat on hot rice. The text really emphasizes the moment the sweet fat melts on the tongue, creating this vivid, direct contrast with the sharp, adult stimulation of the wasabi soy sauce. This is his daily ritual. It's his physical nourishment, sure, but he actually notes that it is also his only salvation. And it's absolutely crucial to understand just how intensely he focuses on this sensory input. Because think about it, when you have literally nothing else going on in your life, the smallest physical sensations become magnified to an extreme degree.
Section 2. The Hikikomori's obsession, isolation, and mind.
The man preparing this meal is an independent hikikomori. Now, in Japanese culture, this term refers to someone who is completely withdrawn from social life, essentially becoming a permanent shut-in. But he's not just anyone. The text reveals he is a former molecular biology researcher. This is a brilliant detail to keep in mind. He abandoned the complex hypotheses, the academic papers, and all the data of the outside world for total isolation in his bedroom. His brilliant, highly analytical mind didn't just turn off, It redirected all of its processing power inward, focusing entirely on his food and his internal fixations.
Section 3. Flesh and religious metaphor. Flesh and divinity.
To really understand his logic, we absolutely have to define the concept of upaya. This is a traditional Buddhist term that means expedient means. Normally, upaya is a method or teaching adapted to an audience to help guide them toward enlightenment. Our protagonist, however, totally twists this concept to suit his own reality. He uses upaya to justify transforming his highly explicit sexual fetishes into a sacred, merciful religious framework. To him, his indulgence isn't a sin or just some basic craving. It's a divine method to sublimate or spiritually elevate his worldly desires. He actually divides his reverence between two specific figures. First, we have Hizuki. To him, she is this untouchable goddess, a fertile shrine maiden and mother of 5, dressed in a white robe and scarlet hakama. She's the sacred absolute that he can only pray to from afar. But countering her, we have her younger sister, Hitomi. Hitomi is the Bodhisattva of Upayaya. She remains single and accessible, and she's dedicated entirely to sublimating the vulgar desires of the masses. For him, Hitomi is the direct conduit through which he experiences his twisted salvation.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates his psychological projection. He looks at the physical ingredients of his meal, the cold roast beef, the shiso leaves, the cucumber, and they become literal manifestations of Bodhisattva Hitomi's anatomy. Specifically, he views the meat as her labia majora. He even notes in the text that initially he imagined her shaved, but because he personally preferred natural hair, the divine Hitomi mercifully accommodated him, presenting with soft, natural pubic hair. It's wild, but this is exactly how deeply his fetish and his religious delusions have intertwined into his physical environment.
And it gets even more surreal. He actually chants a prayer to his meal. Completely deadpan, he says, "Hail to the natural-haired Upaya Bodhisattva Hitomi." It is a seamless, honestly shocking fusion of highly explicit anatomical descriptors with sacred Buddhist iconography. He literally places his hands together in reverence to a bowl of beef, finding a genuine, albeit completely manufactured, spiritual release in the act.
Section 4. The Ritual of Preparation. Ascetic Discipline.
Remember, we're talking about a former molecular biologist here, so his cooking isn't just haphazard. He treats it as a strict religious sacrament. He uses a core temperature control cooker, basically a sous-vide machine, as his holy implement. He takes imported thigh meat and holds it at exactly 55 degrees Celsius for precisely 120 minutes. Why? Well, because this precise scientific methodology perfectly recreates the texture of the Bodhisattva's flesh that he so desperately desires. Science, which used to connect him to the real world, has now become the ultimate tool of his delusion.
So, returning to the final dish, we have these thin slices of meat floating in a pond of wasabi soy sauce. But there are strict rules to this ritual. The text explicitly states that tasting must be kept to an absolute minimum. He strictly forbids excessive indulgence. Just a single, focused taste is required to achieve spiritual sublimation. It's a really striking ascetic discipline applied to what is otherwise a completely hedonistic fantasy.
Driven by this intense isolation, the ritual actually triggers vivid hallucinations. He begins to see these bizarre visions, like 3 goddesses dressed in camouflage gear bathing in a jungle, or 5 small shrine maidens laughing in a temple courtyard. And he doesn't question these visions, not at all. Instead, he interprets everything, no matter how strange it gets, as acts of divine, expedient mercy. His mind is actively manufacturing this rich, surreal universe to replace the society he completely left behind.
Section 5. The Organic AI Conclusion. Operating Requirements.
Shedding all the complexities of the outside world, he eventually concludes that he is no longer human in the traditional sense. Instead, he defines himself simply as an organic AI. And what does this organic AI run on? Well, it functions entirely on 4 foundational inputs: food, sleep, his physical, sexual fetishes, which he just categorizes simply as labia, and his religious faith. That is his entire operating system. The rest of the world, with its data, its social norms, its anxieties, and its endless complications, has been entirely deleted from his programming.
As his metaphorical labia beef continues to melt quietly on his hot rice day after day, we are left with a pretty chilling reflection. This explainer really takes us deep into the anatomy of profound isolation, and we have to ask ourselves, when the human mind is pushed into absolute isolation, how far will it go to manufacture its own twisted salvation? Are there any limits to the intricate, bizarre realities we'll construct just to survive the silence? It's a fascinating, unsettling thought to leave you with today. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the realities constructed around you.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I want you to picture a photograph of just the most mouth-watering culinary creation you can imagine.
Like a really high-end food magazine cover.
Exactly, yeah. You've got this bowl of steaming hot white rice, and draped over it are these thick, beautifully seared slices of beef.
But they're vividly raw in the center, like premium Wagyu or something.
Yeah, highly marbled. And right in the middle is this pristine, glistening raw egg yolk, plus these little textured mounds of bright green wasabi paste. The steam is just catching the light perfectly.
It sounds incredible, but the background of the photo really changes everything, doesn't it?
It really does, because when your eye drifts to the, slightly out of focus background, you realize you aren't looking at a restaurant table. You are looking at a messy bed with 2 white pillows.
Right, which completely shifts the context of what we're looking at today.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the sources we're pulling from today, they aren't documenting a recipe at all.
No, not at all. They're documenting the survival mechanism of a man described as an independent shut-in, a Hikikomori who lives his entire life on that exact messy bed.
Our mission today is to explore how this simple bowl of beef and rice transforms into a sprawling religious system. I mean, it becomes an intense psychological lifeline for him.
And a really meticulous coping strategy for someone who is completely cut off from society.
Right. So we're going to analyze how he fuses culinary precision, ancient Buddhist concepts of salvation, and intense physical desires just to endure the extreme weight of his isolation.
And to do that, we really have to start right where his documentation starts, which is pure appetite, the overwhelming physical sensation of eating.
Because when you withdraw from everything else, human interaction, going outside, eating, becomes your last real tether to the material world, doesn't it?
It really does. In extreme isolation, your brain is deprived of normal external stimuli, conversations, changing environments, the friction of daily life. Without those inputs, the mind can easily begin to dissociate. It literally starts to lose its grip on reality.
And the text describes his dish, which he originally just called the Hizuki-chan ball, with this intense, almost obsessive focus on sensory inputs.
He specifically details the exact moment the fat of the marbled meat melts into the hot rice.
Yeah, the sweet taste spreading across his tongue, and then the sharp, adult sting of the wasabi soy sauce. But what's wild to me is that he secretly calls this dish labia beef.
Yeah, that is definitely a jarring detail.
It is. But at the same time, he spends hours researching safe preparation methods via online videos. I mean, he knows eating raw meat causes food poisoning, and he's actively trying to prevent it.
What's fascinating here is that this fixation on avoiding food poisoning reveals his core survival instinct.
How so? Like just because he doesn't want to die?
Well, if he were entirely apathetic about his existence, he would just consume the raw meat and suffer the biological consequences. He might even welcome the sickness as a distraction.
Oh, I see. Like a way to break the monotony.
Exactly. But he meticulously navigates the dangers of the raw meat because he needs his body to remain functional. He needs to experience that sensory shock.
The sweet fat and the wasabi sting are grounding him. It's neurobiological proof that he's still alive.
Right. If he gets severe food poisoning, his carefully controlled environment collapses into physical agony and chaos. It ruins the one stimulus keeping him tethered to reality.
So he's actively protecting his vehicle. He clearly wants to survive, but he's projecting incredibly intimate human needs onto a bowl of meat.
Yeah, naming it labia beef shows a desperate need for connection.
Definitely. But a tether to the physical world, no matter how intense that wasabi sting is, it just isn't enough to sustain a human mind indefinitely.
No, because we are meaning-making creatures.
Yeah.
Sustenance keeps the organs functioning, but we require a narrative framework to process our existence.
Especially when that existence is literally confined to a single room.
Exactly. That psychological void is what drives him to elevate his daily meal from a physical pleasure to an actual deity.
This is where the narrative in the source material shifts dramatically. The meal evolves in his mind into the goddess Hizuki.
And he visualizes her with remarkable specificity, too.
He really does. He pictures her as a prolific shrine maiden who birthed 5 daughters. She wears a traditional white robe and a scarlet hakama, smiling in a temple courtyard.
He designates her as a hanzan. For those unfamiliar, that's a sacred, inviolable main object of worship.
Yeah, and he dictates very strict rules. She cannot be touched. She cannot be directly unveiled. All he is permitted to do is press his hands together in prayer.
The gesture known as gasho, right? Done from a respectful distance.
Exactly. He even documents having vivid visions of those 5 little shrine maidens laughing in the courtyard. But wait, I'm losing the thread of his logic here.
It is a massive leap from a beef bowl, admittedly.
Right. The entire point of making this elaborate, carefully prepared beef kill is to consume it. If he makes the goddess of the bowl the namesake of the meal completely untouchable, hasn't he just ruined his only source of physical pleasure?
It definitely seems like a paradox.
If the food is his anchor, why construct a mental mythology where he's forbidden to interact with it?
It serves a vital psychological function for him. Consider the environment he inhabits. He is a shut-in living in a stagnant, messy bedroom.
Right, there's no temple courtyard in his real life.
Exactly. His daily reality is totally devoid of perfection, purity, or community. By designating his primary goddess, Hizuki, as sacred and untouchable, he's actively guarding his ultimate ideal from the degradation of his own reality.
Oh, wow. So if he actually consumes the goddess, he corrupts her.
Precisely. She would become subject to the mundane biological reality of digestion and the physical squalor of his room.
So he's essentially putting his own hope behind glass.
Like a museum piece he curates to survive his own circumstances. By elevating her to a hanzan, he carves out a mental sanctuary that his physical isolation just cannot touch.
Because the imagery he associates with her, the white robe, the fertility of the daughters, the open space, it represents everything absent from his life.
And to keep that vision pristine, it has to remain entirely out of reach.
But that creates a massive psychological trap for him. If Hizuki's untouchable, he still has physical, earthly needs.
He's still a human being, right?
Yeah, he's isolated in a room with hunger and sexual frustration building up. He has all this pent-up energy, and he still needs to eat the beef.
The physical reality doesn't just go away.
Right. So how does he resolve the contradiction of needing to consume the flesh without violating the sacred space he just built.
He requires an intermediary. In many theological frameworks, particularly within esoteric Buddhist philosophy, when the ultimate truth is too distant or pure to grasp directly, an accessible bridge is necessary.
You need a method to bring salvation down into the dirt of the human experience.
Exactly, and enter Hitomi, the sister.
Yes, Hitomi. The text introduces her as the Expedient Bodhisattva, or Hoben Bosatsu. In his personal mythology, Hitomi remains unmarried, specifically to save the masses and to sublimate worldly desires.
This is where the physical manifestation of the meat, that so-called labia beef, becomes the literal physical bridge for his mental framework.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text details how his personal preferences dictate the exact form Hitomi takes.
Right, he maps his specific physical desires directly onto this secondary avatar.
Initially, he imagined Hitomi as being shaved, thinking it represented easy maintenance. But upon realizing he actually preferred natural hair, he adjusted the mythology so that she, quote, grew it back.
And he explicitly notes that the bushy, soft pubic hair suited his tastes perfectly.
Yeah, and he projects this exact texture onto the specific cut and preparation of the meat he's eating. It's incredibly specific.
It is. But to really understand this, we need to unpack the Buddhist concept of hoben, which roughly translates to expedient means.
Okay, what does that actually mean in practice?
It refers to pragmatic methods used by enlightened beings to guide the suffering toward salvation. The methods themselves might seem unconventional, illusory, or heavily intertwined with worldly desires.
But the goal is just to reach the person where they are.
Exactly. A classic analogy is using a raft to cross a river. The raft is essential for the crossing, but once you reach the other side, you don't carry the raft on your back. It was an expedient tool.
So he essentially turns the texture of the meat into his raft. But he isn't just satisfying a base urge here. He imposes strict discipline on his consumption.
Very strict. The rules of engagement he writes for himself are rigid.
The text states that tasting must be kept to a bare minimum. One must taste carefully, just once, and sublimate the desire fully. He refers to this as the strict manners of the expedient.
If we think about this in modern terms, Hitomi functions exactly like an interactive, customizable avatar in a sandbox video game.
That is a perfect analogy. Just as a user modifies a digital companion's traits to perfectly suit their gameplay needs, he modifies Hitomi to satisfy his highly specific sexual and physical requirements.
And in his extreme isolation, unregulated sexual desire and hunger could easily become chaotic and overwhelming.
Right, it could destroy him.
So, by framing Hitomi as an expedient bodhisattva, he builds a safe, structured container for those feelings. He offloads his physical desires onto Hitomi so that Hizuki can remain conceptually pure.
It turns the raw, isolated act of eating and experiencing sexual release into a rigorous spiritual practice. He is actively saving his own mind through this avatar.
And the sheer mental architecture required to build such a specific, rule-bound system is astonishing.
This isn't just someone daydreaming. It's a person applying exact, methodical precision to their own delusions.
Right.
Where does a person even get the cognitive tools to build something like this?
Well, the source material drops a massive revelation about his background that completely contextualizes everything we've discussed so far.
Yeah, this subject used to be a scientist. He was engaged in molecular biology research.
Which makes the methodology behind his ritual make perfect sense.
He notes in his writings that his past self felt entirely trapped by worldly hypotheses and thesis data. He found the complex, demanding, peer-reviewed world of scientific academia to be an unbearable prison.
And that pressure eventually led to his complete withdrawal from society.
But instead of leaving his scientific mind behind, he brings it directly into his bedroom rituals. He takes a core temperature control cooker and repurposes it as a dharmic tool, a religious implement.
He abandoned the laboratory because the variables of human society and academic pressure were just too chaotic. But inside his bedroom, he establishes a new laboratory where he exercises absolute control over the variables.
Listen to the exactness of his new experiment. Instead of the hot rice ball we started with, he creates a variation called a cold expedient.
Right, the lean roast beef.
Yeah, he imports lean thigh meat and cooks it using the core temperature cooker at exactly 55 degrees Celsius for exactly 120 minutes.
The lean roast beef is specifically designed to represent the labia majora and visually recreate Hitomi's natural hair texture.
And then he floats these thin, precisely temperature-controlled slices of meat in a pond of wasabi soy sauce, adorned with cucumber and shiso leaves.
The shift from cooking over an open flame or eating hot food to utilizing a core temperature cooker is a fascinating detail here.
Because in molecular biology, managing the precise denaturation of proteins is foundational, right?
Exactly. By setting a machine to exactly 55 degrees for 120 minutes, he completely eliminates human error from the ritual.
And the psychological state this triggers is profound. The text documents that during this specific process, he experiences vivid hallucinations of three goddesses in camouflage clothing bathing in a jungle.
It's a very intense manifestation of his system.
And then he stops viewing himself as a failed human being entirely. He begins referring to himself as an organic AI.
He explicitly states that his early required operating conditions are food, sleep, labia, and faith.
So what does this all mean? He left the exhausting, complex world of molecular biology data only to apply that exact same scientific rigor to a bizarre meat-cooking ritual on his bed.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, that phrase organic AI is the ultimate synthesis of his journey.
How so? It sounds like a total detachment from humanity.
It is a detachment, but an essential one for him. When we look at the neurobiology of perceived failure, the human brain carries an immense load of social shame, guilt, and the crushing weight of unmet expectations.
Right. He felt completely trapped by the endless, shifting demands of molecular biology and society at large.
So redefining himself as an artificial intelligence is a defense mechanism designed to bypass that psychological pain, because an AI doesn't have social obligations.
It cannot fail at being a son, a partner, or a successful researcher.
Exactly. It doesn't experience existential dread or societal shame. An AI is an entity that simply requires its baseline operating inputs to continue running its code.
So by stripping away all the complex software of human society, he distills his existence down to 4 manageable inputs.
Food sustains the biological hardware. Sleep rests the processor.
The synthesized sexual outlet managed through the ritualized Hitomi expedient handles biological urges without the messy variables of human relationships.
And faith provides the executable command to boot up the system again the next day.
He essentially wiped his own hard drive because the human operating system was crashing, and he installed the most basic, stripped-down code possible just to keep the machine running.
The precision of the 55 degrees and the 120 minutes is his way of ensuring the code compiles perfectly every single time.
Because in a universe that feels completely out of his control, the laws of thermodynamics do not care about his failed thesis data. 55 degrees will always yield the exact same physical result.
The ritual provides the absolute certainty that the academic world denied him. It's a predictable, safe outcome generated by his dharmic tool.
The journey we've taken through these sources is just wild. We began by looking at a photograph of what appeared to be a decadent, high-end bowl of Wagyu beef and a raw egg.
And from that single visual, we uncovered the meticulously engineered universe of a former molecular biologist.
A man who uses low-temperature cooking, strict scientific variables, and the Buddhist framework of expedient bodhisattvas just to endure life entirely confined to a bed.
The closing imagery of the source text really harmonizes all of these disparate threads. The rigorous science, the intricate theology, the base physical appetite into one quiet, unified moment.
It depicts the man not as the architect of this universe, but simply as a worshiper within it.
He sits on his bed, presses his hands together toward the bowl in gasso, and chants his customized sutras.
Namu Hizuki Kanseon Bosatsu and Namu Natural Hair Bushy Expedient Hitomi Kanseon Bosatsu.
He offers reverence to both the untouchable ideal that keeps his hope pure and the physical expedient that keeps his body alive.
As he chants, the meticulously researched, temperature-controlled meat quietly melts on the hot rice. The variables have been managed. His operating requirements are successfully met for another day.
It's an incredible look at human survival and meaning-making.
It really is. We all have our daily routines. We all have specific habits, comfort foods, or small rituals that we lean on when the demands of the world feel like too much to carry.
Things that keep us grounded.
Exactly. But imagine for a moment that all your societal roles, your career, your relationships, your public identity were completely stripped away tomorrow.
If you were left with absolutely nothing but yourself in a room.
Yeah. What absolute bare minimum operating requirements would you write for your own organic AI to keep functioning? Until next time, thanks for taking the deep dive.